So a couple things you guys should know about me. You maybe heard this last year. I was thinking like, you had someone with a physics background, a couple engineers get up here and talk. Just want to be super clear, like I'm a rocker and a programmer, right? So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are observations, anecdotes, but it's interesting that I feel like I come to the same conclusions as it maybe some of the other speakers have. I have a lot of similar beliefs. I was thinking about the engineering side, since one of the clients I worked at about 6 years ago is a place called Optical Research Associates in Los Angeles. And when I met the tech support person, I found out she had a degree in optics from Caltech, a PhD in optics from Caltech, because that's the level of questions they get. Then I met the rest of the people at the company. I found out that she was sort of a slacker. And I thought, okay, wow, let's see, a lot of really sharp, educated people, dumb rocker. What am I doing here, man? And I found out that, while these people were really, really sharp about what they do, what had snuck in was a whole bunch of what I'm going to call today accidental complexity, a term I just lifted from Fred Brooks. And the other engineering story I would want to start with is anybody know where this is? I would guess a lot of people here might. It's in Kazakhstan, right? It's Star City. And last time I was working in Moscow, I went to the Russian, they have this little space museum in Moscow with this kid that studied to be a rocket scientist. And now he builds websites. It's sort of sad for dude. But he was walking me through the space program, and the theme that kept coming up was, simple is faster, simplifying things. Now, if you don't know this, some of the things that are interesting and simple about the Russian space program is that it didn't have a really pretty capsule that came down on a big parachute and fell into the ocean. It was a round steel ball that bounced in Siberia. The other thing is that so I'm a child of the 60s. I totally would have loved to have been an astronaut every time. I work in Orlando a lot. I've taken my daughter to the Cape a few times. And I always think that when I was a kid, we went on a trip to Florida. And I don't know why they let us do this, but we got to drive up to a Saturn V, going out to Launch Pad 39A. And that was pivotal for me. And I thought, oh, this is such cool technology. The Russians drive the rocket out like this. And when they want to launch it, they just let gravity kind of do the work. There's a lot less effort. They get it out quite a bit faster. And I thought, that's an interesting metaphor to draw on. So I guess you should also know that any physics references I use are kind of physics a la rock and roll. So you don't have to take them too seriously. They're sort of lightweight. But I thought, these are two books. We have 2 bookshelves at DevJam. We have the classic library of books you've read. And then we have another set of books that I stole from Umberto Eco, who talks about the only books you should have in your library are the books you haven't read, which I think is really an interesting concept. So this Geoffrey Moore book on the right just moved into the I've read column. And the book, the book on the left is a book that I think is really nice. It's a Paul Graham Y Combinator publication where they went and interviewed a lot of people that had started out with an idea and become successful. And I thought, one of the ways I might think of the 2 books is, people that have embraced uncertainty and people that are dangerously overcertain. And I'm not a huge fan of the Geoffrey Moore book. I think it's interesting. And there's the one thing in it that I liked was this idea of why is it at large organizations like Intel, for instance, but there are many other ones, why do good ideas not reach escape velocity? What stops them from kind of getting out? And I thought, okay, that might not be a bad vehicle to use. More specifically, Maria said we work with a lot of different companies. So we will work with a small organization of 6. And that organization, anybody that's ever been in one of those ecosystems, by and large, everybody can tell the product story without regard to what their skills are. Or I should say, maybe the places where people are successful, they're building that narrative. It kind of becomes part of their ethos. So I'm going to say, I used to have the word structure where I have accidental complexity because I feel like there's a really nice healthy tension between product and structure. And I put accidental complexity in there because I feel like that's sort of what weighs things down so people don't reach escape velocity. So like these small companies, they tend to pivot on learning. There's a lot of the ones that I think are successful are always asking kind of what is it that we don't know? one of the things I do like from the lean startup crowd is the language of eliminating uncertainty. Like that's a really good concept. Then you move into a medium size, a larger organization, and wait happens. And like one of the things I see all the time is that there's a small company of 6 to 12, and then it grows up into a company of maybe 60 or 90 or whatever. But everybody used to be a doer is now a manager. And a lot of the doers are crappy at managing because they love doing. And you should have just left them alone. I think Steve Wozniak is still listed as programmer. That's dude's job title. Or they think we got to have this layer. And they, I think, accidentally draw on a metaphor or a system that really isn't contextually insignificant to their world. And they start putting in strata of who works for whom. And so you could think of it this way, like in a small company, there is often one product, one team. And then in a big company, they might have one product and multiple teams. And right there is where I think people start injecting accidental complexity of how they've layered that. And there's lots of different ways to slice it. And I'm pretty much with Dave where I feel like SAFe is not only a tragic metaphor, but it feels like just another example of more process. Because I go into these organizations or like in the Scrum space, they'll have Scrum Masters, and then they'll have product owners, and they'll have Scrum Masters of Scrum Masters, and product owners of product owners. And like one dude drew me this chart where you had product owner of product owner and product owner. I thought, eventually you have to have something more than a naming convention. Right? You actually have to look, because it's also funny, I drew it on the board yesterday without thinking about it, that like product owner of product owner almost reads as like poo-poo. But all they're doing is like, Scrum times 5, Scrum times 6. They're not really thinking, okay, now we've moved into a different level. And I think that's where this thing starts to get weighed down. Now, instead of accidental complexity, it could have said structure, because like a lot of the places that I work that are building medical devices, they are big organizations. And I'm not saying structure is bad. I'm saying unintentional structure added mythically to help you feel better, maybe in Dave's language, kind of pushes you into that complex space accidentally. And then the last one I would want to call out is enterprise everything. Enterprise anything. Like I tried to look it up, I didn't really have enough time. I wonder at what point we started using the word enterprise. Like when did we start prepending things that we wanted to be big and important with the word enterprise? I would probably build on Dave's joke and saying that like, one of my buddies says anything you have to put science on the end of isn't really science because you don't call it physics science. So like political science, or computer science. I know that's like dangerous to say, but I sort of wish people called what I did computing, because I think it's a simpler concept. But this enterprise talk is one of these classic metaphors that people start living by. And the one that just kind of gets me all wound up is enterprise agile. Pretty much right in the bucket of like military intelligence, In fact, I think that intelligence is another one of those words, but we don't put it on the front, we put it on the end, like business intelligence. There's a lot of those terms out there. So I decided to kind of challenge you guys, and I'm not really gonna do, it's not a presentation, and it's not a workshop, and it's not a talk, and it's not a course, and I was trying to kind of figure out how to put those together, like, I don't know, talk and workshop, and the best one I could come up with was talk shop. But what I want to do is go through just 5 different things to look at it and stop at the end of a few of them and have you guys try to explore this stuff on the spot. So this group starts kind of interacting in some fashion. So the first lesson is mass has consequence. And so I want you to think about like, what mass have you accumulated, especially what things have you added accidentally? So one of the ways that I see people do that has to do with process. And it's not new, right? The Agile community is just Groundhog Day for another process revolution that kind of comes in. People get frustrated and they say, it's too much, let's have less. And they cut it down and then it grows in the background, kind of like a tumor or something like that. And it's been interesting looking at like, the different styles where there was like extreme programming and Scrum and Kanban and SAFe, and I got really frustrated one day and I thought, we need a new process, right? Just like every process idiot does. But I created a process called Nanban. Nanban is so lean, there isn't even a website. You can go look. I own the domain, but there's no website intentionally, right? And my poor wife is a very patient person, so all this stuff starts kind of like right before I go to sleep because I like to think a lot. So like Dude's Law, Nanban are things she suffers at night. When I go to sleep, then she stays up irritated. But I asked one of my friends, I have a really good friend who I think is an excellent engineer who lives in Mumbai. I asked him, I said, would you ever serve a meal that's only naan? He said, probably not. And I said, by and large, would you ever serve a meal that doesn't have naan? And he said, probably not. I thought, that's a really interesting way to put it because process is just part of the meal. So this idea of like the least amount of process with the most real and measurable value is a very intentional sentence. To say, it doesn't say no process. It says the least amount that's appropriate, responsible. Measurable would be my want. And the measures are where it becomes difficult. That's where I think a lot of people start punting. Another concept that I think people need to look at is like, what's their mass of certainty? And so I stole an idea from an author that I liked. Nassim Taleb talks about epistemic arrogance being the difference between what you know and what you think you know, which we've all suffered from. So I'm going to give you guys this idea of product arrogance, which is the difference between what you're sure people need and what they actually need. And I think we're wrong way more than we're ready to admit. And sometimes what we're doing is we're not using these processes that allow us to learn quickly to ask, how wrong are we? To eliminate uncertainty. There's still a lot of people using agile methods that are only calculating how much they got done. And that, I think, is a very trivial calculation. It's like it's like loving your car because it has a speedometer and odometer. That's sort of a given. In fact, I had this developer the other day say to me, I hate burn-up charts. And I thought, wow, why is Dude saying that? That's a little bit like saying, I hate my speedometer. You know, why would Dude say that? He's saying that because he thinks the metrics aren't meaningful. The next one I would float out is, I don't know the word requirements, and I didn't come up with this. I heard this from Kent Beck a long time ago. It's like, one of the more damaging things that's happened. But it's just deep in our DNA. And I think a lot of people are trying to solve this problem by writing a better story. And all they're doing is they're replicating the same problem they have. They're trying to write a better story instead of having a better discussion or build a better narrative. And Richard's sitting up there in the back, and Richard and I are friends because he was another person I discovered was trying to inject the word anthropology into our ecosystem to say it's about kind of discovering people and their world and hopefully not biasing them in the process. This came from being at a company. I got in trouble for saying who it was the other day. But I went to a meeting. It's a small division of a very, very large company, large on the scale of Intel. Came out of the meeting, and everybody got an email, like $7,600. And I was like, wow, what was that? And it turns out that's the cost of the meeting. So at the end of every meeting, someone calculates the cost and sends it out to everyone. Which I don't know if that's a whip, right? It seems a little bit dangerous, but I thought it was really interesting because then everyone kind of looked at whether it was worthwhile. Now, my approach to meetings is we should do like test-driven meeting. You show up for the meeting, tell me what success looks like. If you can't, I'm out of here. Why? I mean, it kind of goes back to, I saw Edward Tufte speak one time. Dude gave this really wonderful talk. I was sitting there thinking, wow, this is so enlightening. And on the second day, he kind of went into just things that seemed super obvious to me. Like if you schedule a meeting, you should show up early and kind of help organize it. And there's 200 people all writing down, schedule a meeting, show up early. How tragic is that for Tufte? I think he's like, did you hear what I said yesterday? Because that was the thing that a lot of people took away. The other one that I see is we have to do this. My company is obviously much smaller, but I try to run DevJam as a non-have-to company, because that language often is indicative of problems. The other word I listen for a lot is, we just have to do this. Like just is the worst estimate people give to each other. Just is filled with just bloated amounts of certainty. But this idea of we have to do this, we have to use Git, is the one I've heard in the last 3-4 years from all the propeller head geeks I know. It's like you want to use that. And for instance, a lot of ecosystems where people don't have a measurable amount of engineering responsibility, they do something like Git, and it just allows them to be more irresponsible, away from each other more often. Doesn't really, because they've never really solved the problem. So those are just some examples of mass that I see, and I'm going to kind of just use that as a simple metaphor. So I'm going to give you guys 2-3 minutes. Turn to the person next to you. If you know the person on your right, try and turn to the person on your left. Introduce yourself and talk about, like, what do you think has been added to your world that maybe you guys could get rid of? What is the mass that you have? Try and be very concrete, okay? So 3 minutes of chaos in the room begins right now. Go. Okay, so hopefully, hey dude, can you light me back up? Hopefully that gives you guys some context for like the next little iteration like this. I'm not, I guess I was kind of, I had some words in this slide before, like, you know, it's your ship and you're flying it, so you can crash it if you want to. You know, like there are things that you can take responsibility and do. People say to me, oh, no one will let me write any tests. I'm like, really? They won't let you write one? Well, yeah. Well, can you write 10,000? Well, no. Well, somewhere in between is a number that's more realistic than 0 or 1. You know, and in that testing space, it takes critical mass of a few. And you get a few in place, and people start experiencing it kind of almost like an existential level of like, wow, this is a good experience for me, and that's what makes it successful. We were talking about this in the coaching class I taught yesterday. You can lecture people all day long around test coverage and number of tests, and you're just, all they do is game the system if they don't believe it. And what I've seen is when people experience or they see it, a lot of people can't see that that's possible. So it's not something they start growing. A lot of places I work where there's really hard problems to solve, they figured out automation is not an extra step. It's something you do that actually saves time. So the second lesson in gravity is gravity sucks. So what I meant by that is like, you don't necessarily control it. You guys live on planet Intel, right? And maybe you live in division XYZ, and every division and project and organization has different levels of gravity. So this is a harder challenge to everyone. It's like, unlike science, we're going to now step into science fiction, where there could be something you could do about it. It's not as hard as it is in that world. So this is, I was scanning over here, I would guess that this was something that's already out there. Work and process limits, matrix planning, all these things where people treat the work that we do that's knowledge-based like shoveling. So like if you are shoveling, the delta between how many rocks you can shovel is often the distance between the piles. It's really, really simple, but people don't queue like printers. Printers do a great job queuing. You just give them more work and they do that over and over again. So when people say that to me, I'm like, well, first of all, you should know that you're not unique. This is something I see everywhere, and so if we want to make change in this space, we got to figure out who are we talking to, what do you think their belief system is it an evidence-based discussion? If so, what evidence can we gather? And then all the agile stuff starts. It's just a bunch of tools to try and kind of fight a very large war that's out there. And it's interesting to me, like I'll meet groups and they'll say, well, we tried Scrum and it didn't work. And they'll say, and so we're using Kanban. So I'll say, well, why didn't Scrum work? Well, people hated the meetings. Well, why did people hate the meetings? Well, I don't know, they just went a really long time. Well, why did they go really long? Well, because we didn't really know what we were talking about, so you went to Kanban. That's going to solve it, good one, yeah. Now, if they would have gone to Nanban, they would have been there. So like, we were actually just talking down here in the corner, the gravity of roles and titles, HR, whatever you want to call it. Yesterday in the coaching class, I was saying that while I think it's really helpful that companies are starting to use the word coach, In some cases, it's gone all the way through the role hierarchy back into a definition, and the life got crushed as they defined it back as a title. And a lot of places where it's successful, coaching is more important than the coach. And there's all these terms out there. Like yesterday, one of the questions was, how does a coach and a scrum master work together? And I just feel like we're right at the edge with some of that language where all we're doing is propagating the same problem. We've just rebranded things. It's interesting, we changed the language, but we didn't change the behavior. And at first it was kind of interesting. There was a change, but now a lot of people have reverted back. At the risk of being potentially cynical, a lot of the places that we work, Scrum Master means I used to be a project manager, but I went to a class and they changed my title. Right, and some of those people, all they have is a whip. But they're not figuring out, like, one time I heard Jeff Sutherland talk about Scrum Master, and it was pretty cool, and Jeff was kind of talking about it, and it sounded kind of like sensei, teacher, leader. And it was a whole different perspective, because someone was asking about the whip over here, and I heard J.B. Rainsberger make a joke one time, which is possibly politically incorrect, where he said, where there's Scrum Masters, there's Scrum slaves. And I've seen that in a lot of ecosystems where people report to the man, and you haven't really changed the system much. And so I would love to say, and you should use these words, right? But I don't have a set that's much better. I stumble through kind of pathetic language in this space, but this is how we tend to teach people. It's like, instead of saying stakeholders, there's people that are making investments. And what can we do with their investments? What I see, especially in the software-only space, is a lot of people run their projects like they're buying bonds. And we're hedge fund traders. On our best day, man, we're trying to make a series of small mistakes towards something really interesting. Products is right where it falls down. So a lot of people want to say, you're the product owner. I was at a large organization once, and the way they chose the product owner is the Scrum Master said, we put 8 people in a room, and I said, I'm going to come back, and one of you has to be the product owner. That's totally arbitrary. The picture I drew yesterday that I stole from Marty Kagan that I think is a good vehicle for people is to say, instead of saying who's the product owner, what if we switched this to like product ownership, product design groups? I hear people call them product communities. You need, feasible, valuable, and usable. If that's one person, great. That's not my experience with larger ecosystems. There's usually, it's kind of more like the way you publish a newspaper where there's things that are happening all the time, and there's simple things, which are the weather. Well, I guess the weather isn't really simple. The local news, a small bit piece. But there's larger pieces where someone needs to be out doing investigative reporting, trying to understand it, if you will. But the newspaper or any publication or any news event happens at 6. You don't flip on your TV and it says the news is going to start at 6:10 tonight because the project slipped a little bit. It starts when it starts. And then this builder thing, Ray and I was asking him about kind of like the maker movement, because I started using the term maker for that collection of people long before I knew there was a maker movement, because I was searching for some word other than team. Because team is sort of a tragic word in a lot of organizations. Team means you had 26% available, you had 18% available, you had 32%, and all together you're almost a person. So let's forget that you all live in 3 different countries, but we'll call you a team. No one else uses that word that way. That's totally made up by us. And coach, I don't know. I would have probably put producer up there, but I feel if we're going from Scrum Master to coach, that's better. I like the idea of producer. I said this last year, that's what we're doing at DevJam, is we have small groups of product delivery teams that are led by a producer. It's as simple, there's 2 roles. It doesn't mean that everybody has normalized skills on that team, but it's a little bit like a band. You go to see the band, you don't go to see only the guitar player where the rest of the band sits down. I mean, that might happen in some situations, but by and large, you're looking for the music. And this is another one of these organizational things that I feel like is out there, this mythical full utilization stuff. And it's tough, right? It's a little bit like work in process limits, people working on multiple things. And this is where the challenge goes out to you. Like, what can you do about this? Because you can do something about this. You can start gathering evidence to make the argument, but you can't just say it doesn't work. And I think this is where another one of these things where a lot of the Agile teams fall down, because they're just focused on how much they're getting done. They're not saying that's one dimension of a larger understanding of learning iteratively. How do we take this cycle and not turn it into a magic 2 weeks? 10 days is not E or pi, right? 10 days is just 10 days. It's not a magic constant, it's just kind of a learning window. So we come back to enterprise, blah, blah, blah. I shouldn't ask that question because that might not be good, but like this word is prepended to Agile now, and I don't really see Enterprise Agile as a meaningful initiative anywhere I go. I certainly don't see it lasting, and I would really challenge and possibly get myself in trouble with the hosts. I think the language of enterprise transformations is a bad metaphor, because to a lot of the people in leadership that I've met, it makes it sound like it happens and it's over, and then we've moved on. And I don't think that's one of the shifts we're making. We're moving towards kind of like long-term collaborative learning. I bet I'm not the first person to say something like that, I'm sure of it, but it's starting to get under my skin again. And then this is the last one I would kind of want to float out to you guys, because I feel like, by and large, I see people being successful down here. One team, one product. Where I see large-scale challenges that I think people aren't talking about yet is, here's a big thing. There's a product. It gets decomposed into some smaller teams, which get distributed across these teams. And this person here, a lot of the portfolio level of people I meet, the only question they ask is, when's it going to be done? Is it going to be done? And I feel like a lot of times it's because it's the only question they've been given to ask, or they've asked a lot of other questions and they've started giving up on them because they're kind of burned out on the answers, or we're not producing the evidence we need to. Now, this is exactly where the safe stuff really started kind of rubbing me the wrong way, because I feel like the game is to say, here's this thing that we think we're not sure, but we think it might be valuable. And it turns out it's going to take more than one little team to build it. How do we decompose that thing across teams, times, and use, or teams, time, and product, or scrum teams and sprints and backlogs, so that we can recompose it to start getting the portfolio people to ask different questions, like what is done? What is wrong? What did we miss? All these other questions other than is it done? Because we're still pretty bad at that question, especially in the face of uncertainty. That's a Taleb quote I like, is like, if the future is not like the past, your evidence doesn't matter. It's not helpful. Yesterday's weather is possibly insignificant. So what we've been doing with groups, and this, I've drawn this picture a bunch of times, it seems super obvious to me, is you have this little team-based planning that's happening. And if you drew it top to bottom, there'd be a planning, maybe a handful of little stand-ups, maybe a review and a retrospective, and you rinse and repeat, and that's team one. But you get n number of groups trying to come together to produce one thing. A lot of the people in the Scrum community, they don't have anything for you out of, this is how this team works. And so this is sort of a known space, and just on the planning side, people might spend maybe between like 60 and 120 minutes doing that planning cycle. Although I will tell you, a lot of people tell me, yeah, we've got our planning cycle down to 60 minutes. Like, why did you want to do that? Well, because we wanted it as short as possible, because we didn't want to waste any time. And then when you actually go sit with their planning, it's a scheduling exercise. If all it is a scheduling exercise, write a piece of software to do it, right? You don't need to get people together to have a scheduling meeting. They've thrown out the discussion. The narratives wither under trying to optimize the process. So what we've done, and I've watched a lot of other companies do, is say, let's just put a little cycle up here. And this is kind of, to use like the aspect language, kind of a cross-cutting planning session where you're thinking about cross-cutting concepts like security, architecture, user experiences, all the things that don't fit into one story and one team and one iteration. And we'll kind of get this group saying, like, what are the cross-cutting goals? Then there'll be a subset of people that are in this space. And oftentimes it's like someone that's thinking product and someone that's thinking technology. Now it doesn't matter if it's software anymore. And that group is listening into that conversation and kind of bringing it back into that team. And again, this is pretty mechanical, but it surprises me how many groups have just injected an enormous amount of process complexity right here. So this group, they can be doing whatever they want. Scrum, Kanban, non-ban, I don't really care, as long as they're aware and producing something that's communicative and measurable to the other groups. Then we get this, if you want to, leadership group together for another 60 minutes, and we talk about dependencies and constraints. And so When SAFe came up, it was like, oh, wow, this guy produced this thing that allows people to work at scale. I've been doing this since 2003. I got thrown into this right away. And in 10 days, you've added 2 hours on a Monday when you're dealing with like multiple teams. And so I feel like I didn't need to kind of have an infographic to do that. I just sat with people and did it, and it turns out to work really well. Maybe it's something that some of you guys are doing, but I find that like every time we talk to people about this picture, they're like, wow, that's amazing. And I'm like, I can barely even draw a box, you know? But it allows us a forum and that goal setting for like decomposing things across those teams. So it might be that, for instance, from a current constraints perspective, this group and this group have very little to do with anybody else. But this group is the one where everybody's dependent on. And that's what feeds this discussion down here. What are we going to do about that so we don't get multiple teams in a program overly disconnected? And so a couple other enterprise things. I always think it's funny when people use the metaphor, it's like a Swiss Army knife. Has anybody ever sewn with one of these? I've ever even tried, right? It's there. It's a funny tool that everybody thinks is wonderful. I mean, maybe I'm more of a Leatherman kind of dude, right? Because I've used that a bunch of times. But that's one of the things that I walk into quite a bit is we have to use this tool. And I used to get pretty frustrated because I've used a lot of tools. Probably going to get in trouble with you guys right now. My experience is Jira is where storytelling goes to die. And it's very interesting. It's not Jira's fault. But what happens in my experience with Jira is people talk about tickets and numbers. I'm working on 5862. And that's the beginning of the death of storytelling and narratives, because they're work units. And then you multiply that by a little bit of Scrum frenzy, and you get more people getting more tickets done faster every 2 weeks. And that's not real velocity, kind of real learning. That's just more people getting more stuff done every 2 weeks. And I put this in here, so I thought I should talk about it. I know Dave mentioned it, but I do a lot of work. I'm more of kind of a low-level shoveler, not kind of as high level, where there's a governance involved, and we may or may not have to follow the rules. I said yesterday jokingly in a class, I was at a big company one time, the ISO auditor came in, dropped a giant box on the desk, hit the desk and went, and he said, you know what, you fill all these forms, you'll be ISO certified. I thought, that's quality. Right there, dude, I'm all up for that certification. Medtronic, Boston Science, St. Jude's did a research inside their organizations, and they found out that all 3 companies were doing more documentation than the FDA asked them to do. But mythically inside the organization, there's like, well, we have to do that. It's very much like you could try something different. So that paper is like the FDA equivalent of the IEEE, and that gave everyone a vehicle, someplace to look towards, like we can do something different. So let's try one more little crazy round of chaos, which is like 3 minutes where you turn to the person next to you and say, what is the gravity that holds you down? Is there something you could do about it? Please try and come up with one thing you could do about it, okay? 3 minutes of chaos begins now. I'm sorry, that wasn't actually 3 minutes, but I want to kind of move through these last 3 ideas and just kind of poke a little fun at some things. So in this case, I thought I would actually use a definition because I hear a lot of people talk about velocity. And so I know that some of you guys might know the people that injected the term velocity. I think they knew what velocity was. I think a lot of people who use that word right now don't know what velocity is. The same way they learned about the Fibonacci theories through Scrum. And so they don't really get who dude was, and they don't know the number system is wrong, but they got their Fibonacci series, right? And it is, you know, a lot of the people that tell me they have more velocity, we want more velocity. I just heard it the other day at a company. Someone said, you know what, we need to get 500 points done. We're only getting 300 points done, so we need 100 more points. It's just that sentence is just filled with that dangerous certainty. I got a number, and it's my new whip, and I'm going to use it. And they don't get that it's speed and direction. They're going very fast somewhere. And they might have a bunch of continuous integration. I might have said this last year. My email signature says, if you don't know where you're going, it's easy to iteratively not get there. which is also turns out to be very close to a Yogi Berra quote. So like when you're next to the man, right, that's a good thing. So, what can you do to start increasing real velocity? And the real is the hard part. Like, where are you going? Because it starts challenging you to kind of embrace this uncertainty or come up with measures that are more than how much stuff did we get done. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that's like the starter set. So let's try an example. Everybody think of their existing team, project, program, whatever they're working on, and come up with one thing you feel like you could do to increase real velocity. When you have something, shoot your hand up. Okay? All your hands should be going up because you're super bright and really sharp. Yep. Just got to come up with one thing in your head. I'm going to pretend all your hands are up. You're acting like people from Minnesota at this point, for God's sakes. Yeah. I can't raise my hand. That might be embarrassing. All right. How many people thought of taking something away instead of adding something? Well, you see how small those numbers are? And right away, that's conditioned behavior. Something is going on with us, and it's ripe in this process space. And so I think, I don't know if I could handle dinner with Taleb, but I think I'd like to give it a go, because I think he's a pretty interesting dude. He's pretty intense. And there's a bunch of interesting things in this book. He's definitely a frustrated philosopher. So this is his foray into just kind of openly saying, look, I'm a philosopher wannabe. And he said his argument, his claim is that in a lot of languages, there's not a word that's the opposite of fragile. And so he would say, he came up with this idea of anti-fragile, and maybe he would frame it as fragile is a very nice wine glass. You drop it, it shatters. Robust, which is what a lot of people would say is the opposite, is a washing machine. Anti-fragile, maybe not mayonnaise, is a human being. And mayonnaise feels probably anti-fragile, but a human being, you give them part of a virus and they become immune to it. The washing machine, you can't do that with. And the book is filled with a lot of things that I think people trying to learn faster, people trying to kind of embrace uncertainty and eliminate uncertainty. Like one of the things that he says is by and large, people accidentally add things and they grow complexity in the background. So what could you take away? Now, it sort of feels like that's something people often try to do in their scrums and fail, because they use these questions of what would you add, what would you stop, what would you continue doing? But they're not asking people to say, what could you stop doing and get more done with? What's the drag in your system, so you could kind of start having that kind of a discussion. I see healthy teams having this discussion, and if we had more time, I would ask you to do this. So they're going to distribute these slides. I was trying to give you kind of some little tools to kind of take away, and this is another way you could kind of reframe a retrospective. Because I think something happens, maybe it's human nature, maybe it's boredom. A lot of retrospectives turn into another bad meeting every 2 weeks. And there's no real kind of digging in. And I sort of feel like someone asked me yesterday, what is coaching? I think it's saying what no one else will. I think it's asking people to kind of be a little bit better than they are, but not so much better that they feel like they can't get there. When I produced music, I thought, my job is to maybe get rid of some of the clutter that this band has added in and see if when what's left, there's something really beautiful there without kind of burning their house down. So I come into the studio and you help them be a little bit better than they are. But you don't play the guitar part for the guitar player if they're not good, because you just took dude's soul away. So kind of what are some of those things you could stop doing? And then the last 2 lessons, one is missions are essential. So this is iterating to nowhere stuff. So last time I was here, I talked a lot about this, and I showed you guys some examples. And this is a session I taught yesterday was to use simple physics. I feel like assume delivery is a constant, and it's not always. But when that becomes more of a constant, then you're faced with asking a harder question of are we delivering the right thing? How wrong are we of what we're delivering? How do you measure that? Because it's not as quantifiable. So a couple of different things I think you could kind of do is go after who are your passengers? Who do you think is going to get value out of it? Who cares about what you're doing? Yesterday when we did this class, I framed it as come up with an idea to explore. Think of some people that might help you explore that idea. Visualize what you think they might be doing or doing with what you're producing, and then take a little customer journey. How do you figure out where to start? And so that's kind of the tools that we're using. One is this Personas. This is a company in the Twin Cities. They build a product called CrashPlan. They're called Code 42. Everybody gets the nerd reference. CrashPlan is what Apple uses for their backup system. These guys had no idea they were going to have Apple as a customer. They just grew really fast. And the thing I love about this picture here is this is a group of engineers learning to tell product stories. They're not focusing on how to get stories done in sprints. They're learning how to tell product stories so when they go to do their work, they can have more contextual significance. And I think it feels like the same way we took development and testing and we kind of interleaved them and said, test a little, build a little, test a little, build a little. I think we need to start doing that with this design stuff. Design a little, build a little, test a little, or some sequence like that that's repetitive. And that, a lot of people feel like we can't do that. In the coaching session yesterday, who was in the fishbowl around the hardware stuff? Raise your hand if you guys were in the fishbowl. Please share your experience, because I thought it was the best part of the day. I loved the hardware discussion. We went through 3 little iterations because people wanted to keep talking about it. And so I put this picture in because I showed it to you guys last year. Small microcosm of an Intel called Douglas Scientific. Last year I was telling you that they're working together to kind of build this medical instrument. So you have 3 mechanical dudes, 2 software, and an electrical. Back here is all the tools that we use to kind of say, why are you doing what you're doing? Who are you doing it for? And they're building out a vehicle to take them on their journey, or to figure out where they want to take someone, where they want to do their early learning. And so last year I was kind of telling you that over here is someone, here's some examples of that person, and then this is a little path they might go through. The reason these little Post-its are turned sideways is this is a human interaction and this is a device. So a year has passed. These guys have built 5 iterations of a medical instrument. They have a fabrication shop that's right across the street. They have changed the physical design of the device over and over and over again because they're trying to kind of put all these groups together. And yesterday I heard the metaphor that you guys use for that is a dungeon, which, let's all go to the dungeon. I didn't really feel like that might be the right metaphor. Maybe you guys dig it. Maybe it's an Intel thing or possibly a Portland thing. Could be an Oregon thing. I wouldn't be surprised. I think these guys metaphorically have lit up your dungeon. And I was listening to people talk about the dungeon, and there was one of the Intel coaches in the room who was bringing it up as an example of look, this is already happening. So maybe you swap out that metaphor towards something more enlightening of saying, the other tragic metaphor in this space is a war room. But all the stuff that I see being successful, it's that same kind of thing. Skunk Works, dungeon, war room. It's just they've brought it above board. It sort of feels like that's something you guys could do. I think that that's very, very doable. And this is one of many instances where I see that. Now, it's not a happy little picture where they pull a story into an iteration. They all get it done at the same time. And all the work magically balances between hardware, firmware, and software. But these guys are truly a team trying to build a product. And so when there's some kind of segmentation that starts happening where one group gets ahead of another, they challenge that collectively, which I bet might be happening somewhere in your dungeons. So I would throw this out for you guys to think about. If you have an idea where you're going and you're measuring how far you've gone, how often are you measuring how wrong are you? And how often are you celebrating that? Man, I said yesterday we should stop calling them mistakes and stop calling them bugs and start calling them mistakes. Then we have great meetings where we got together and said, how many mistakes are there on this project? I think that would be a pretty helpful dialogue. So that would be another one of these things you guys could try. Get together and talk to someone. It's how are you actually validating things other than just progress completed? Now you're going to find it's harder. It's more ambiguous. The thing I think a lot of engineers struggle with product thinking is that it's sloppy, it's nonlinear, you're wrong. A lot of times what you did doesn't help you learn in the future. You have to just celebrate being wrong and move in a different direction. And I think that's not what people are taught. I've worked with a lot of lawyers. That's definitely not what lawyers are taught. The lawyers I've worked with are taught to almost never say they're wrong. The surgeons that I've worked with go through such a brutal hazing that they never want to say they're wrong. I mean, and this is, I don't know, maybe I met just a crackpot set of surgeons, but I was stunned being around their ecosystem. I was like, wow, you're out there. Good thing you don't have to talk to the patients. And good thing they're unconscious, because I don't think they'd like talking to you. Sorry. Hopefully there's no surgeons in the audience. I guess the last thing I would throw out is you need a good crew, a ground crew, and a ship crew. You need all the people that are involved. And I kind of hit on this, so I'm not going to really go into it. But I think a lot of teams are still formed accidentally. So maybe I would throw this out to the people in this room that are forming the teams. It's like, why are you putting together 6 people that all have 13%? And for me, that's something that I walk into all the time. Because like at my little company, I have the ability to control that and not let that happen. But at a lot of large organizations, it's happening, and I'm trying to gather the evidence. And then if that's happening in a tragic way at the team level, it only gets multiplied at some high degree of multiplier at the program or the portfolio level. And that would be, that would kind of bring us full circle to look at these little companies, these little spaces where people start out, they all work together, they have a wonderfully lit dungeon. It might actually be fun, even though it's smelly and small, because they're all bonded around something. And then they kind of grow up and gravity sucks them back down to the planet. So I would ask you guys, I thought I was going to use like shifting left a bit. I thought that might be a funny Intel joke, being a former programmer. And that's the kind of joke I tell my wife, and I'm like, someday you're going to think that's super funny. I am covertly conditioning my daughter by getting her to learn Python so she can control Minecraft on a Raspberry Pi, so she will be converted. Later, hopefully she'll thank me for that. I hope that this talk gives you guys some things to think about like what you could change and what's around you that you could change possibly. And I hope the rest of your day is super wonderful. Thanks very much for listening.